22-year absence, the Boston Celtics are NBA champions once again.
9 years, 400-plus wins, 7 appearances in the playoffs, and the 2008 World Championship.
Well, for the Clippers, this is a collapse they'll think about all summer.
During that whole process, like, we never worked on adjustments. We never worked on what to do differently.
Ty Lue was sitting right next to me, so he better hope it's not adjustments.
You're a Sixers fan and you thought blowing an 18-point lead in Atlanta in Game 4 was bad. Welcome to Game 5 back home in Philly.
You don't know how to make in-game adjustments.
You think Ben Simmons can still be a point guard for a championship team like the one you guys want to become?
Yeah, David, I don't know that question or the answer to that right now.
Phil Jackson, Greg Popovich, Eric Spoelstra, Pat Riley, and Doc Rivers. These gentlemen are just 5 of the 15 greatest head coaches in basketball history, according to the NBA's top 15 list. This ranking has caused outcry and rage throughout the basketball world because one name stood out from the rest: Doc Rivers. When it comes to discussing NBA coaches, there are fewer names that string up more controversy and debate than Doc Rivers. Each and every NBA fan will have a different opinion on him. Some believe he is misunderstood, and that his 2008 ring speaks for itself. That the unanimous respect he received from the basketball world shows you that he is one of the greatest coaches ever. This opinion was the common belief among a majority of spectators for a long time, but over the last few years, Doc Rivers and his reputation has deteriorated. He's gone from being admired by his peers to talked down upon by former athletes.
Yeah, Doc Rivers.
He's had accusations of throwing his players under the bus when the going gets tough, and choking playoff series that he should have won. But how many of these criticisms are fair, and how much of his questionable playoff history is his fault? 23% of all blown 3-1 leads belong to Doc Rivers, yet he is only one of 10 coaches to earn 1,000 wins in NBA history. He's known for pushing the 2019 Dynasty Golden State Warriors to 6 in round 1, as he coached the 8-seeded Clippers. But he's also known for infamously choking a 3-1 lead to the Denver Nuggets in round 2 of the 2020 playoffs. Doc Rivers is the most polarizing coach in the league. But is the criticism that he receives justified? Or is it another example of the NBA media taking losses out of context and pinning it on one coach? Doc has had some undeniably terrible moments, while also having some unquestionably exceptional moments. 4 teams have had the Doc Rivers experience, his first stop being the Orlando Magic in 1999. Rivers put together a respectable, solid career as a role player from 1983 to 1996. His leadership and knowledge of the game set him apart from his teammates, and this strong command of the game made him a sought-after coach once he retired. Rivers had 0 coaching experience, but that didn't stop the Orlando Magic from hiring him before the 1999-2000 season. While Doc may be liked by some and disliked by many, what cannot be denied is his understanding of the game. Teams and organizations respect him, and part of the reason why he's so admired is because of his run in the iconic Heart and Hustle season. Everyone remembers the Penny Hardaway and Shaq O'Neal duo. These 2 superstars dazzled fans, putting on unforgettable shows in Amway Arena every night. Basketball was booming in Orlando, but unfortunately, by the time Doc came to town, they were long gone. Shaq had left to the bright lights of Los Angeles in 1996, and Penny had signed with Phoenix. In an instant, Orlando went from an exciting, up-and-coming squad with 2 young stars to a lottery team. Prior to the 1999-2000 season, every NBA analyst projected Orlando to be a bottom-of-the-pack tanking nightmare. There were no stars, no leaders, and little hope. What would follow was one of the most memorable seasons in Magic history. Orlando shocked the world, defying all expectations and earning a 41-41 record. For a team that was written off as just another bottom feeder, this record was incredibly impressive. A common pattern among Doc Rivers-led teams is that he is the perfect floor raiser, but the worst ceiling raiser. Rivers is excellent at coaching teams that have lower expectations. He can take squads that aren't expected to go far and push them to their limit. However, when it comes to teams that are already contenders, his flaws begin showing, and more often than not, those contenders fail. Rivers strengthened the 1999-2000 Magic's defense, helping them earn the 9th best defensive rating in the league. Like all things in Doc's coaching career, the beginning is exciting, while the ending leaves you shrugging your shoulders and face-palming. Doc arrived in Orlando and led a mediocre roster to 41 dubs, earning the Coach of the Year award on top of it. 3 years later, he was fired. What happened? It's the summer of 2000, and the Orlando Magic smell blood in the air. Tim Duncan, a future Hall of Famer, was just 22 years old and looking for a new team to take his talents to. On the flip side, Tracy McGrady and Grant Hill, 2 players on the Raptors and Pistons, had signed with Orlando. A super team was in the process of being formed, but one final superstar was needed to complete the trio, the big fundamental. Duncan saw what the Magic were doing and came incredibly close to signing with Orlando. What stopped him? Doc Rivers himself. According to many sources, including former Magic player Grant Hill, Rivers told Duncan's girlfriend that wives and girlfriends were not allowed to travel on the team plane. At the time, having wives going on the plane with players was uncommon, but the San Antonio Spurs had recently started allowing it. This one comment shocked Tim Duncan. His body language changed, and the idea of signing with Orlando quickly became off-putting. That's right, the Magic lost out on one of the greatest players ever because Doc Rivers said wives and girlfriends were not allowed on the team planes. If you asked Rivers though, he'd tell you this story is completely false. Rivers claims the reason Duncan didn't sign with Orlando was because Tim met one final time with Greg Popovich for a meeting. The Spurs apparently persuaded Duncan and stole him away from Orlando last second. Doc tells one story, while former Magic players tell another. The Doctor may have swung and missed on a monster core of superstars in Orlando, but he'd get plenty of other chances with even more talented rosters in the future. What started out with surpassed expectations ended in hopes that went unfulfilled. The Doc Rivers Orlando Magic era quickly faded into mediocrity. It was headlined by poor records and backbreaking injuries to star forward Grant Hill. Through 2000 to 2003, 3 playoff appearances came along with 3 first-round exits. The most infamous of the bunch came in the 2003 playoffs, where Orlando blew a 3-1 lead. That's right, the notorious 3-1 number that would haunt Doc Rivers first originated here, where the Magic blew a 3-1 lead to the number 1 seeded Detroit Pistons. The 8 seeded Magic had shockingly beaten Detroit in the 3 out of the first 4 games, but ultimately faltered. It may have been an unfortunate collapse, but this blown lead shouldn't be held to the same standard as some of Rivers' future ones. The fact that the 42-win Magic put up such a fight as an underdog is admirable, but this would be the last playoff appearance of Doc's Orlando coaching tenure. The following 2003-04 season would be Doc's last. Orlando plummeted due to further injuries, opening up the season 1-10. Somebody had to pay the price, and that somebody was Doc Rivers. He was canned on November 18, 2003. The O-Town era didn't end how Rivers wanted it to, but his reputation was in the upper echelon of coaches. He'd be back as a head coach. He had the connections, pedigree, and mentality that teams desired. Just 1 season later, he'd get the job opportunity of a lifetime. The Boston Celtics were a franchise of excellence, and they were in dire need of a coach. They were coming off a round 1 sweep in 2004, with the 27-year-old All-Star in Paul Pierce leading the way. The Celtics needed to compete, and felt Doc, who had elevated the Magic in the past, would do the same here. Immediately, Rivers did just that, playing a big role in the Celtics improving by 9 wins in the 2004-05 season. The Celtics earned the 3rd seed, but ultimately lost in 7 to the 6th-seeded Indiana Pacers. Some would initially jump to call this an upset, but in reality, the Celtics and Pacers were separated by just 1 game in the Eastern Conference. The next 2 seasons weren't too kind to Boston. They went from a playoff team to the lottery, winning just 33 games in 2005-06 and 24 games in 2006-07. What many forget is that the opinion surrounding Doc began to become shaky during this mediocrity. He was criticized by the NBA media for his coaching style, most infamously by Celtics superfan Bill Simmons. Simmons, who worked for ESPN and had a huge voice in the media, boldly claimed that Doc stunk as a head coach, calling for him to be fired. Contrary to popular belief, it wasn't all peaches and cream for Rivers in Boston. Change was needed in Beantown, and Danny Ainge had just the plan in mind to send the Celtics from the bottom to the top. Everyone remembers the Big Four Celtics: Kevin Garnett, Paul Pierce, Ray Allen, and Rajon Rondo. This ultra-talented super team was the one that Doc Rivers won his first and only ring on. The C's went from 24 wins the prior year to 66 stubs in the 2007-08 season. The final image of the Celtics hoisting the trophy in TD Garden is iconic, but very few NBA fans truly know the struggle the Celtics went through to get to this point. The first 2 rounds of the 2008 playoffs were borderline nightmare material for Boston. In round 1, the 66-win, 4 All-Star Boston Celtics were in a dogfight with the 37-win, 8th-seeded Atlanta Hawks. The Celtics played consistently horrible in crunch time, losing games 3, 4, and 6, all by 10 points or less. If history had gone differently, we could have been talking about this Celtics team as one of the biggest chokers in the history of sports. Fortunately for Beantown, the C's stopped playing down to their competition, pulling themselves up by their bootstraps and crushing Atlanta in Game 7. Anyone who had lifted a finger to question Doc and his coaching style were silenced as the C's advanced. It wasn't smooth sailing from here though. LeBron and the Cavs were up next in round 2, where Boston squeaked by in 7. Once again, the Celtics played down to their competition. The Cavs roster outside of LeBron was pathetic. Boston's story gets much better from here on though. They ultimately clicked, beating the Pistons in 6 in round 3, and the Lakers in 6 in the finals. The Celtics took control and established their dominance, annihilating their opponents and bringing home Banner 17. Doc Rivers coached well. His most impressive display came during Game 4 against LA. In this game, the Celtics overcame a 24-point deficit, taking a commanding 3-1 lead. This was the performance that all but killed the Lakers' hopes, and Doc deserves a heap of credit for keeping his squad engaged. This comeback may be remembered, but what's overshadowed is the Celtics' putrid fourth-quarter performance in Game 2 of that same series. With under 8 minutes left in the fourth, the Lakers, who were trailing by 24, turned into a flamethrower from downtown. They marched all the way back and came within 2 points with 38 seconds left, but in the end, the result was a W for Boston. Still, this was forgotten. Both the Celtics and Doc Rivers were champions, and nothing else mattered. This was the peak of Doc Rivers' coaching career. He had earned his first ever ring. His team was ultra talented and wasn't going anywhere. He was a unanimously admired figure in basketball and was in charge of one of the most storied and successful teams in the league. It was all downhill from here. What followed this championship from Boston was a slow spiral from the kings of the world to a first-round exit. Boston won 62 games the following year in the 2008-09 season, and talks of a possible dynasty began looming over the NBA world. But their hopes of Banner 18 were shot once Kevin Garnett suffered a knee injury that cut his season short. The 2009-2010 season saw Boston bounce back, advancing to the finals in a rematch with Kobe and the Lakers. Unfortunately, the Celtics blew a 3-2 lead, losing to their longtime rivals.
Whoa, hey.
Kendrick Perkins, their starting center, dealt with a knee injury that hampered him in Game 6 and sidelined him for Game 7. Still, Doc receives a fair amount of criticism for this loss, with Glenn Davis, a former Celtic who was on the team from 2007 to 2010, calling him out.
And I get it. You want your veterans to help you. You rely on your veterans. You rely on the guys that got you there. But as a coach, you have to adjust. And that's the greatest thing about being coaches. He didn't use, what truly got him there.
Laker head coach Phil Jackson had perhaps the most disrespectful but truthful quote regarding Rivers and his team.
This team has lost more games in the fourth quarter than anybody in the NBA. They know how to lose in the fourth quarter.
When a legendary coach with as many rings as Phil Jackson says this, you might just have a problem. Fast forward to the 2011 postseason, and this time LeBron as a Heatle is back for revenge, dismantling Boston in 5. The Celtics were simply out-talented and were aging fast. By the time the ensuing 2012 playoffs arrived, Boston was on their last legs. Against the Heat, the C's jumped out to a 3-2 lead, with heroic efforts by longtime Celtic Paul Pierce leading the way. Yet, this 3-2 lead resulted in no finals appearance for Boston. Rather, they turned into a floor mat for LeBron James to step on. LBJ had 2 of the greatest games of his career in Game 6 and 7, eliminating the Celtics and going on to win his first ring. Perhaps LeBron's greatness made people forget, but this is in fact another blown lead for Doc Rivers. Does he deserve a ton of the blame? Sometimes the power of greatness beats any coaching scheme you could think of. By this point, the once formidable Celtics core was declining, and Doc's eyes began looking elsewhere. Once the C's lost in round 1 of the 2013 playoffs in 6 to New York, a rebuild in Beantown was inevitable. According to Doc, he was fine with staying in Boston, but was also perfectly content with coaching somewhere else. As stated by other reports though, he had no intentions to stay for a rebuild in Boston. Either way, Danny Ainge traded him to the Los Angeles Clippers for a first-round pick, officially ending Rivers' Boston campaign. In the end, the job was complete. A ring was won. Now, it was time to do it again. Everyone talks about the Celtics and how talented their championship core was, but the LA Clippers core with Doc isn't far behind in terms of star power. LA was confident that Doc would take his winning pedigree from Boston and sprinkle that on the Clippers franchise, but nobody could have predicted the meltdown that would ensue. There are 2 important periods that Doc Rivers coached in LA, one of them being the Lob City era, and the other being the rise into the Kawhi and Paul George era. In 7 years in LA, Doc Rivers and his squad made the playoffs 6 times. 57% of the time, the team won above 50 games in the regular season. 3 times, they made it to round 2. Despite this consistent success, there was one haunting achievement that this franchise could not accomplish. They never made it to the Western Conference Finals. Even with a combined 5 All-Stars, 3 Six-Man of the Year winners, and phenomenal depth, the Clippers under Doc Rivers imploded every single postseason run for 7 years. And therein lies the ultimate question: who's to blame for this? In the 2013-14 season, Doc was in year 1 of his coaching career as a Clipper. This was the most talented team that Lob City would have. Blake Griffin and Chris Paul were both in their primes, and the starting lineup was balanced. The 2014 playoffs saw LA defeat Golden State in 7 in round 1. But it's important to note that Andrew Bogut was out for this entire series. Bogut was a key piece defensively for Golden State, and a majority of NBA fans believe the Warriors would have won this series with him healthy. In round 2, the Clippers lost in 6 to the Oklahoma City Thunder. In Game 3, the Clippers had the lead at multiple points throughout the 4th, but failed to capitalize and put OKC away. One poor fourth quarter showing isn't enough to pin on the coach, but 3 of them certainly are. That's right. One of the most agonizing defeats of Doc Rivers' career came in Game 5, where the Clippers blew a 7-point lead in 49 seconds. This choke all but destroyed their chances at a Western Conference Finals appearance. In Game 6, it was the same story. The Clippers kept it close in the 4th, only to suddenly take their foot off the pedal. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me 3 times, shame on Doc. The Clippers played horrible in the 4th quarter of Games 3, 5, and 6, dropping a very winnable series. However, it must be acknowledged that the Clippers were understandably distracted by the complete meltdown regarding their bigoted owner, Donald Sterling. Doc kept the team together, empathizing and echoing their frustration, and becoming a true leader that Clippers players trusted during this unfortunate time. The following season, in the 2015 playoffs, the Clippers blew a 3-1 lead to the Houston Rockets in round 2. LA once again had the series in their grasp. They led by 19 points at home in Game 6. Instead of leaving the arena with their first Western Conference Finals appearance ever, the Clippers left with their heads held low. They blew the lead and got crushed in Game 7. Rivers was heavily scrutinized for his poor lineup decisions, more specifically how much he played Jamal Crawford. Crawford averaged 13 a game on 34% shooting from the field and 27% from 3 against Houston, but still averaged 28 minutes per game. Another dreadful, embarrassing loss, and by this point, Lob City was running out of gas. 2 first-round exits in 2016 and 2017 put an end to this all-star core. Rivers wasn't just the coach of this team though, he was also the general manager. From 2014 to the summer of 2017, Rivers was in charge of all of the trade, draft, and free agency decisions for LA. As an executive, his moves were head-scratching. Everything from questionable trades to horrible contracts, to even a disaster involving Doc's own son. Austin Rivers was a Clipper from 2014 to 2018, and hated playing under his own dad. LA experienced a ton of drama throughout the Lob City era. A fair amount of it can be linked to other Clippers players believing Doc treated his son differently than the others. It was clear from the get-go that Doc was not cut out to be a GM. He was demoted in August of 2017. Chris Paul reportedly disliked Doc. Blake Griffin allegedly disliked Doc. By the beginning of 2018, they were both gone. Doc and his squad may have underperformed for half a decade, but Rivers had avoided being fired. He was handed an extension in June of 2018. Doc excels when the expectations are low, and entering the 2018-19 season, few NBA fans believed the Clippers could make the playoffs. Instead of missing the postseason, LA improved dramatically from the prior year, winning 48 games and taking the 8th seed in the West. This season saved Doc Rivers' LA career for the moment. He did a phenomenal job coaching this team through 82 games. LA lacked a true #1 star talent. As a result, everyone got touches and showcased their abilities. The 2019 postseason saw LA square up against one of the greatest teams of all time, the Dynasty Warriors, and the Clippers fought extremely hard. They forced the Warriors to a 6-game series, including an iconic Game 2 performance where LA overcame a 31-point deficit on the road. Doc went from blowing leads to overcoming them. He redeemed himself in these playoffs and reminded the world of who he was. The Clips may have lost in 6, but nobody expected them to dethrone the Warriors. What LA showed was that they had the pieces to succeed. They just needed one star to take them over the top, or 2. The 2019-20 NBA season was the first year that the superstar duo of Kawhi Leonard and Paul George played together, but it was the last year Doc coached the team. Rivers played a role in recruiting Kawhi, even going out of his way to compliment the Claw months before he was a free agent, and getting fined for it. With higher expectations comes higher pressure, and LA cracked come playoff time. They infamously blew a 3-1 lead to the Denver Nuggets in round 2 of the 2020 postseason. No Western Conference Finals appearance, and another choke added to Rivers' list. Fingers are pointed everywhere as to why LA lost in such an agonizing fashion. Paul George blames Doc. Doc blames Paul George. Kawhi remains quiet. The reality is that the blame can be shared everywhere. Kawhi and PG drastically underperformed in this series. Doc Rivers also shoulders a massive amount of fault for his inability to make changes. Doc continued doubling Nikola Jokic, despite Jokic being one of the best passers in NBA history. Doc consistently played Lou Williams heavy minutes, despite Lou being a defensive liability who couldn't make a shot on offense to save his life. Lastly, the decision by Doc to play Montrezl Harrell over Ivica Zubac may have been the most costly mistake of all. Zubac had a plus-minus of 32 against Denver. Harrell had a plus-minus of -37. Zubac, despite being such a positive impact player, only averaged 24 minutes per game in this series. Harrell was destroyed by Nikola Jokic, and the Clippers' interior defense deteriorated when Trez was on the floor. Doc saw all of this unfold and decided to do nothing about it. It cost him his job. Rivers wasn't just fired for this series, rather it was a culmination of all of his failures in LA coming together. Paul George, like Len Davis, also believed Doc failed to make adjustments when needed against Denver. PG claimed Doc was using him like Ray Allen or JJ Redick, with too many pin downs. Doc disagrees, arguing he played Paul in a ton of pick and rolls. As for the adjustments comment, Doc chuckled. He said Ty Lue, the Clippers' soon-to-be next head coach, was sitting right next to him throughout that blown 3-1 lead, implying that things wouldn't be much different in LA with Lue at the helm. The following season, LA made it to their first ever Western Conference Finals. Negative chatter surrounding Doc and his questionable playoff failure began rising. If only it could have ended here. Maybe then Doc's legacy would have been saved. But no, old Doc couldn't just ride off into the sunset unscathed. He wanted to try and take another swipe at a second ring, and it cost him his reputation. In the present day, any support for Doc has vanquished. 2 straight second-round exits with the talented Philadelphia 76ers has left him despised among a majority of the NBA world. What was a coach who was admired by his peers for decades has now turned into a man who the entire state of Pennsylvania once fired. In Doc's short tenure with Philly thus far, it has been an absolute train wreck. Philly earned the #1 seed in the 2020-21 season, but ultimately choked in comical fashion against Atlanta in round 2. Philly had a far superior roster than the 5th-seeded Hawks, but blew both an 18-point lead in Game 4 and a 26-point lead in Game 5. Some jumped to blame Sixers star Ben Simmons for this defeat, as his poor free throw percentage and lack of fourth-quarter shooting was detrimental to the team's offense. Doc certainly agrees. He claimed following Philly's Game 7 departure to Atlanta that he was unsure if Ben could be the point guard on a championship team. This one comment is one of the biggest reasons why Simmons never played another game as a Sixer. It hurt his feelings. Did Ben Simmons sorely play under expectations against Atlanta? Yes. Does Doc Rivers hold an immense amount of responsibility for 2 huge blown leads in games 4 and 5? You bet. Maybe if this was his first blown series, this Atlanta disaster would be easier to swallow. Doc was not fired following this elimination. Rather, he got another shot. 1 year later, in the 2022 playoffs, the Sixers were a second round out once more. This season was highlighted by Ben Simmons not playing due to having a poor relationship with the team. Rivers kept the squad focused in a time where this drama could have festered and destroyed Philly's locker room. However, come postseason time, Doc was in the spotlight for his incredibly odd lineup decisions. He started DeAndre Jordan over Paul Reed against Miami in games 1 and 2. Jordan was a -31 in this series. Reed was a -2. It's as if Doc just didn't learn from the 2020 playoffs with Zubats and Harrell. You can only blame the players for so much. At what point does the head coach bear the responsibility for such consistent failure? The man who was once on top of the world has fallen. No longer is Doc Rivers respected by a majority of NBA fans. Now, his reputation is in shambles. When his name is brought up, ravenous Sixers fans call for his head. Clippers fans, who were left ecstatic at his initial hiring, are left traumatized. Celtics fans say, thanks for 2008, I guess. And Magic fans only think of Tim Duncan. When it was announced the NBA had listed Doc as one of the top 15 greatest coaches ever, his name stood out like an elephant in the room. It's as if his past success has been overwhelmed by his present failure. Those who revere him call him Doc. Those who despise him call him Glenn. Some will only think about the 2008 ring, while others will only remember the sheer incompetence that ensued.
I wish y'all would tell the whole story with me, all right?